Okay, I have with me today former CIA intelligence officer Larry Johnson to help us understand what's going on in the Russia-Ukraine war, things in the Middle East, here at home. Larry, thank you so much for being on the show today.
It's always an honor and a privilege, Stephen.
Well, just minutes before you and I jumped on this call, I don't know if you saw or not, but House Speaker Kevin McCarthy has officially opened an impeachment inquiry where he has said that there is enough criminal activity documented to warrant an inquiry on whether the sitting president of the United States, should be impeached. He
Yeah.
also said behind the scenes, the White House has been obstructing the investigation more than they've been telling the media. And it's now time to publicly let the American people know that the Bidens are going to be investigated for their alleged bribery and pay to play schemes through their son, Hunter Biden. What are your thoughts on this? This is kind of a big deal with the sitting president having these kind of accusations and allegations.
Never in the history of the United States have we had so much public evidence of clear corruption on the part of a serving president. The only question is, what took Kevin McCarthy so long to come to this conclusion? Seriously, Helen Keller could see it. And this is the evidence of the family shakedown, just his own personal wealth. You know, you're not supposed to go to Congress and become a millionaire, a multi-millionaire, which he has become. And part of the reason is it's corruption on both sides. You've got Republicans and Democrats as well engaged with this. So I think they're going to start the investigation. The Department of Justice is going to do everything it can to obstruct. They're going to try to argue, oh, this is an active case, you can't look into it. And I think a lot of this is going to wind up before the Supreme Court. But the bottom line is that Joe Biden is corrupt, and he's been enabled by many members of the establishment, including members of the Senate, and needs to be held accountable. That's one of the big reasons we have so many problems in D.C. Nobody's ever held accountable for anything.
Yeah. Well, and the White House immediately shot back and said, that this is Republicans trying to prop up a failing Donald Trump, while at the same time, while at the same time trying to tarnish the record of an incredible American president. I mean, it's insane what they say. Like they're saying exactly what they're doing to the former president, as if it's happening. It's just insane to me.
Well, it is a theme that is cutting across American society. I mean, that's the same mentality that says that a biological male is actually a female, that a biological male can, quote, breastfeed, that a biological male can get pregnant. I mean, it's just when you cross into that level of delusion, there is no such thing as truth anchoring people anymore. It does, and facts no longer matter. They repeat the opposite. They close their eyes. It's like the temper tantrum that I'm sure you may have experienced with some of your younger children, where they close their eyes and put their hands over their ears and they're crying, so they're not going to listen. But it doesn't change reality. And the reality is this: Joe the economy's not doing well. The country is in chaos in the major cities. Crime is rampant. Places that you used to love to visit. I know I love to go to San Francisco en route the Napa Valley. You don't want to go there anymore, not unless you're wearing a biohazard suit. And in Chicago, get your body armor on if you're going to be going downtown anywhere. And so, and then, bankrupting the United States in the course of pouring billions, literally billions of dollars into Ukraine, that even, President Zelensky's now admitted, hey, they lost the counteroffensive. They've gotten beaten.
Yeah. Speaking of Ukraine, Senator Elizabeth Warren wants to open an investigation into Elon Musk, saying that he used his power and authority over Starlink satellite internet to decide when and when not to supply Ukraine with free internet. And by the way, nothing's free. He paid for it out of his pocket, because
Right.
even the US government didn't want to pay the internet bill for Ukraine. But now he's being investigated as if he's some kind of Russian puppet that helped Vladimir Putin inflict murder and damage on the Ukrainian people. Do you think that this is just a giant waste of time, or in her mind, does she really think Elon Musk changed the outcome of this war in Putin's favor?
Yeah, anything that Princess Liawatha says, the fake Indian, you always have to take with a grain of salt. And in the case of Elon Musk, he probably deserves a Nobel Peace Prize for not lighting a fuse to expand the war in Ukraine. Because if he's going to start allowing his Starlink system to be used to pass intelligence to Ukraine that Ukraine is then going to use to target Russian military assets and Russian civilians, it escalates the possibility that Russia is going to retaliate by taking out the Starlink system, which means destroying satellites, which means a significant escalation in this war. And so I think Musk he's clearly not a dumb guy. Anybody that's been able to come up with a different economic opportunities, from the Tesla to the space fleet, he knows what he's doing. So he made the right call. But it's just, Elizabeth Warren is typical of these warmongers that now inhabit Washington, D.C. And it used to be the Democrats were seen as the party of peace, or at least the anti-war party. That's no longer the case. Man, Democrats and several Republicans alike are all down for, hey, how much more war can we get going on?
Yeah, absolutely. Yesterday, Congress was kind of blindsided with the details of a $6 billion hostage swap with Iran. The United States is going to allow a South Korean bank to release $6 billion of Iranian money in exchange for 5 American hostages. Is this wise? Is this more common than we realize? Or could this lead to more Americans being kidnapped around the world to trade for money or favors?
I don't think so. I mean, I know that's one of the concerns that's being expressed. The problem with the American relationship with Iran, it's like if any of your viewers or listeners have gone through a really bad divorce to the point that they don't have anything positive to say about their ex-spouse, that's the state of the relationship between the United States and Iran. There's no forgiveness on the Iranian side. There's no forgiveness on the American side. And so we've done a lot to project onto Iran things that they really haven't done for a long time. In the early days of the Iranian regime, after they overthrew the Shah, which the Shah came to power because we, the United States, overthrew his predecessor in 1955, I believe. So there was this lingering resentment and anger towards the United States for its interference in Iran. The Islamists take over, begin chanting death to America. Everyone remembers the old lovable Ayatollah Khomeini. He looked like the devil incarnate. And then in those early days, Iran was very active in carrying out and supporting terrorist attacks against the United States, such as the bombing of the Marine barracks in October of 1983 in Beirut, Lebanon, followed a year later by the bombing of the U.S. Embassy again in Beirut, Lebanon. They backed a guy called Imad Mughniya. So in the 1980s, they were very active in supporting international terrorism. In the 1990s, we started seeing a transition. And, this isn't my opinion. I got this from one of my CIA buddies who was actually running Iranian intelligence assets. Iran shifted its strategy to going after and killing or carrying out attacks against dissidents, people that were Iranian, that were living outside of Iran. And during this, and then we get into the 2000s. Well, during the 2000s, we've got a combination of the United States and Israel carrying out terrorist attacks inside Iran, assassinations of nuclear scientists. So there's been always sort of this tit for tat, but over the last 20 years, I don't recall a single significant terrorist attack that was backed by, paid for, funded by Iran. So Iran's been wanting to get what it views as its money back. The United States, we've got ourselves into a position in terms of our rhetoric vis-a-vis Iran, that we can't do anything to try to calm the tensions. So it's like a bad marriage, and the two parties are never going to forgive each other.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that insight. Today, it's in the news that Kim Jung Un of North Korea has arrived in Russia to meet with President Vladimir Putin,
right,
to discuss arms and weapons trade. How dangerous is this alliance, and how do you think this interaction will go?
Hey, it's Stephen Gardner. Sorry to interrupt this interview. I promise it only gets better, but I wanted to stop for just a second to tell you about Miles Franklin Gold and precious metals, because this is where I buy my own gold and silver. The truth is, the US government is out of control. They've printed over $7 trillion in the last few years, which has devalued the US dollar. On top of that, we are losing our basically strength around the globe. We have the BRICS nations now trying to wipe out the US dollar and make life significantly more expensive. This is why gold and silver is so good, because it holds value, and it's outperformed many sectors of the US stock market over the last 20 and even 30 years. Now, Miles Franklin has the best prices. I promise you, I have looked around, and no, they don't offer you free silver and gold for signing up, because they don't rip you off. They just have the best prices. So send an email to the email down below, and also check out their website, and make sure to let them know that Stephen from YouTube sent you, so that you can get the best prices. All right, let's get back to this interview.
Is put North Korea in more of a position to want to maintain good relations with Russia and with China, and ultimately it will feel less threatened because it has the full backing of Russia and China. In the past, when it wasn't certain about the relationship with Russia, and there was always a bit of an antagonistic relationship with China, it was always more likely that Kim Jung Un could do something crazy. But I watched the video of him climbing off the train. They had a red velvet staircase, gold handles. He was smiling. Took the train from Pyongyang up to Vladivostok, and I think what this signals, though, is this is a way of what's called horizontal escalation on the part of Russia. So Russia now, by intensifying its relationship with North Korea, creates another security threat that the United States has to worry about, and worry about more in a way that it didn't previously. And it's been quite a change from when Donald Trump was there. Trump was able to go talk to Kim Jung Un, and despite the United States, our press, we have a tendency to always portray these guys as cartoon characters. Fat, stupid, tyrannical. And, I'm always of the notion that guys that are in those kinds of positions, or gals, unless they have some sort of skill set, they wouldn't continue to be in those positions. So we shouldn't so much underestimate them. But I think this is part of Russia playing another card that's completely in response to the U.S. effort to use Ukraine as a proxy to attack Russia.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you for that. Back here at home, General Mark Milley said that Ukraine only has a few months left in her, and then this counteroffensive will end. He didn't really give much more detail than that,
Yeah.
but Do you see this ending in peace talks or the Russian Federation army steamrolling Kyiv?
Well, I don't think they're necessarily going to invade Kyiv. Uh, again, the initial portrayal of Russia trying to take over, and I call it. You remember, Kyiv is the Russian pronunciation, so I'll stick with the Ukrainian Kiev, Kyiv. Um, the Russians were not trying to take over Kiev at the time. What they were trying to do was give an incentive to Ukraine to negotiate, which they did. And the negotiations apparently were bearing fruit until both the United States and Great Britain weighed in and basically put the kibosh on it. So what is happening right now with the counteroffensive, Ukraine's physical ability to sustain its army in the field is bleeding out on a daily basis. I mean, we're talking since the 1st of June, 77,000 dead at least. And you're even getting Zelensky admitting that they've had horrific casualties. The female physician who's in charge of the health ministry of Ukraine just yesterday was interviewed and talking about the horrific losses. And there's other information dated to last October that had the death toll at that point at 372,000 killed in action. So what this means is you're well over 500,000. It may be as high as 600,000 dead. So Ukraine's ability to sustain this fight, it's not months, it's weeks. And it may be as few as 3 or 4 weeks. Once the weather changes, and it will change in October, mobility will become less possible. But Russia will still have the ability to strike Ukrainian bases, fortifications, emplacements, infrastructure with missiles and bombs delivered by combat aircraft. So that's not going to stop. Russia's not going to stop with that. They will continue to attrit and destroy Ukrainian infrastructure. The problem Ukraine is at that point, it doesn't really have any capability to fight back in any significant way. That's what the Americans continue to miss. Even Zelensky today, earlier in a comment, noted that, the lack of combat aircraft, that's why they lost he admits they lost the counteroffensive because they didn't have air support. They don't have air supremacy. Duh. I've only been saying that for a year. So, I'm not Clausewitz, so I'm not some great military genius, but I can figure that out.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I don't know that it feels good to be right, but, based on your intelligence and your background, you could just see it coming.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's like when you tell your kids, hey, that stove's hot, don't touch it.
Yeah.
And then they touch it and go, yeah, I got burned. It's like, I told you.
Yeah.
But you had to find out for yourself. And what's alarming though is you're not seeing a change in the fundamental beliefs of the Biden team and some of the key members in the House and Senate, and even within the press. They still harbor the notion that all they got to do is continue to apply some pressure, that Vladimir Putin is fragile, he's weak, and if just a little more pressure, he's gone. We'll force him out. And they're not thinking through, like, okay, what comes next? Because the most likely scenario is if Putin was removed in such a way, he'd be removed because he was too soft, that he didn't pursue the war as aggressively as many in Russia want it pursued. So he'd be replaced by a hardliner, which means the United States would then be confronted with Russia attacking Western assets. And the West simply does not have the means to counter that. I saw a comment on one blog, someone saying, we just need to send our Air Force into Ukraine to clean this up. And it's like, guys, do you not understand the concept of air defense? That Russia has the most sophisticated, most well-developed air defense system in the world. The United States has nothing comparable to it. That means our planes go into that theater, into that environment, they will be shot down. And it's, no matter how many we send, they will be decimated. So we need to stop with this, the Tom Cruise fantasy of,
That's what I was just thinking.
Yeah.
I love Top Gun more than anybody, but this fantasy that we can just go in and immediately turn the tide of the war is infantile.
Right. It really is.
Yeah. Medvedev, who was the former president, again, he may just be Putin's snarling, barking dog. But he said yesterday, if this war doesn't end, the United States is deserving of another 9/11 attack.
Yeah.
I mean, like these people they're not saying this for fun. They're saying it because they're starting to feel backed into a corner, and they've got a lot of weapons in their corner. It's kind of scary. One question that I would like, your insight on is, you said that the Biden administration continues with this fantasy that Ukraine is doing better than they are. Is that because they're being fed bad intel, or is it because they're holding their position and rejecting good intel?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. There is at least enough intelligence out there to indicate things aren't going well. We saw earlier this week, there was the director of analysis at the Defense Intelligence Agency, a Dr. Trent Maul, M-A-U-L. So he gave interviews to The Economist, to Newsweek, and the Daily Telegraph in the UK. I couldn't tell if he spoke only to The Economist and then those other two outlets copied it or what. But in any event, this was not Trent Maul waking up one day and saying, you know what? I feel like talking to the press. I want to just go out and vent a spleen, tell them what I think. No, he was given the good housekeeping seal of approval to go out and talk to the press, to send a message. I guarantee you it had the approval of Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, Mark Milley as the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and probably at least Jake Sullivan over at the White House. So Maul was not doing this on his own. He was sending a message. And the message was, well, Ukraine still has a realistic chance of breaking through and getting through these defensive lines. But then he went through the litany of, well, okay, they don't have enough equipment, they're running out of soldiers, and weather's going to turn against them, and they don't have combat air. And so without that, he was correctly and objectively identifying the weaknesses. Now, understand, a guy like Maul, he's not writing those talking points on his own. That's why they had analysts like what I did. My job, the substantive analyst, was to write out talking points, which are, bulleted points, maybe 3, 4, 6, depends on how many, that a principal like Maul can look at, commit to memory maybe, or read from, that gives him what the substantive analyst believes. And then he can repeat that. So that's what I said. This was not a spur of the moment, not some guy, not like you and I just sitting down chatting and saying, hey, Stephen, what do you think about? And Larry, what do you think? And then back and forth. No, this was scripted. And so the importance of that message is that when you read through it, they still, within the DIA, the message is coming forward as they still believe that Russia is fragile and that Putin's got a tenuous grip on power. Now, that I think is dangerous. That completely misjudges what Russia is and the Russian experience.
Yeah. Oh, unbelievable. All right. I feel like I'm taking you around the world today.
That's all right.
Lots of big stories in the international news. President Maduro of Venezuela is calling on China to fund their infrastructure and rebuilding their oil refinery industry. Is this just China's way of capturing another country in their Road and Belt Initiative? Or is this them genuinely propping up a future partner that can supply the Chinese empire with large amounts of cheap oil?
Well, I think it's a combination of both, because Venezuela has been such an object of attack by the United States over its policies, and China is reacting as well to the U.S. what it views as U.S. gross interference in its sphere of influence. So they say, okay, two can play that game. You want to send military equipment to Taiwan, even though you agreed with us 50 years ago that Taiwan is part of China. All right, we'll go into Venezuela and we'll help bail them out of some of their financial and economic mismanagement. So, it's China is not sitting back dormant. That's the point. And the U.S. policy on this, I think, has been really short-sighted, because at the same time, from 50 years ago, that initiative started by Richard Nixon launched the economic boom in China, which led to them become a manufacturing center for the world. That's why Tesla was building its cars there, and Apple was building its phones there. I don't know if you saw the video I posted the other day. So since Huawei has come out with its own chip and is producing its own smartphone like the iPhone, there is an imaged video clip taken inside a shopping center in Beijing. On one side, you see the Huawei store just jam-packed with customers. The camera pans, and directly across the hallway is the Apple store. And it looks like the Apple store that'll be in your local mall. It's empty, or there may be 2 or 3 people in there.
Wow.
So, we were sanctioning Huawei. Boy, we're going to teach them. And now what the Chinese have done, said, okay, basically screw you.
Yeah.
And that's to Apple too, because remember, Apple was counting on billions of Chinese buying its phone.
Yeah,
they're not going to buy it now. They've got a locally produced phone that is not going to be subject to Western sanctions. So once again, the United States, through the reckless use of sanctions, is cutting its own throat.
Wow. Yeah. Has there been a time where sanctions helped? Because I mean, I'm fairly young.
No. Yeah. No. I mean, we imposed sanctions on Japan in like 1938. How did that work out? Well, that led to Pearl Harbor. So I am not aware of a single instance since 1938 in which the United States applied economic sanctions on a country in which we achieved a change in government and or a change in policy. And the reason for that is simple. You can be effective with sanctions. Let's say that you control 90% of the world's oil. You can sanction a country and say, hey, if you don't do what we want, we're not going to sell you any more oil. Well, that means that country doesn't have many choices. It can't go elsewhere to find an alternative source because you control 90% of it. So unless a country controls 90 to 100% of something, has almost monopoly control, the sanctions will not be effective. And we've tried economic sanctions because of the reserve status of the dollar, thinking that because people need to use U.S. dollars for trade, that they'll therefore have no other options. But that's not the case. They have found other options, and they have, particularly now with the latest sanctions on Russia, it has kick-started BRICS to a new level. It's witnessing sort of the decline of the G20 and an opening up of a whole new financial institution around the world that will be trading without relying on dollars. So when you have the Saudis and the Chinese and the Russians, along with Brazil, all willing to accept trade in other currencies other than the dollar, the primacy of the dollar is over.
Yeah. Well, yesterday, Breitbart News released some kind of scary data from the Department of Homeland Security. Over 150 people on the U.S. terrorist list have come into the country. They are sure of their entrance through the southern border, but they are unsure of their current whereabouts.
Yeah.
How dangerous is this? I mean, wasn't it the 9/11 hijackers that were able to make their way into the country and then set up normal shop
Right.
as if nothing were happening, and then train, and then boom, execute when it was time?
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, this is a complete failure. You may remember we started off early talking about what a tremendous job the Biden administration has done. Yeah. Border security. Right. Um, the fact that they, quote, have identified these people means that at some point, somebody provided either an identification card, some sort of physical ID, or they took biometric samples. You know, they do have the ability to collect DNA and then run that DNA through a database and to identify people that way. But the fact that they did identify him and did not take steps to grab them really created a problem.
Yeah. Wow. Well, okay. I'm sure you saw, just two more questions, then I'll get you out of here.
Okay.
I'm sure you saw over the weekend, the governor of New Mexico decides
Oh,
to
yes.
issue this order to basically take away Second Amendment rights for firearms in an attempt to slow down crime in New Mexico. Now, I'm certain, I'm 100% certain the criminals are the first ones to comply with this, not the everyday person. But how dangerous is this? I mean, on the one hand, it's our Second Amendment right, and yes, guns do
Yeah.
create problems. On the other hand, they just threw gasoline on every conspiracy theory that the government is out to take your weapons. What were your thoughts on this story?
It's just very simple. The government has refused, governments like the state of New Mexico have refused to enforce existing laws. If they'd simply enforce existing laws, they would eliminate a lot of the problems. Look at Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden broke the law in lying on his federal application, that the application you're required to fill out when you purchase a firearm, that he wasn't using drugs, and he was a drug user. He lied. He should be in jail. But no, you let him go. And they've done that repeatedly with felons, with people who have committed crimes who shouldn't have firearms.
So, final question. Yesterday, there were many Americans, and especially 9/11 victim families, that felt snubbed or slighted by the president being the first president not to be in New York or Pennsylvania for the 9/11 memorial.
Right.
Uh, Biden decides to spend extra time in Vietnam, comes back. They decide to land for 2 hours in Alaska. He talks to people in Alaska that had nothing to do with people in New York. What were your thoughts on that decision to not be there and instead send Vice President Kamala Harris, who then chose not to speak to the American people or the families that day?
Yeah. They're politically tone deaf. No other way to look at it. And then Biden, on top of it, lied. He claimed that he was at the World Trade Center the day after the attacks, which was absolutely not true. So, I mean, the man is just a congenital liar. We're starting to deal with the fact that as time goes on, there's less sense of political necessity or urgency to attend to these kinds of memorials. You look at this year, there's still the commemoration of December 7th, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, but it received very little political coverage on most of the mainstream media. It was maybe a passing reference.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, just, you think about it, somebody who's now 22 years of age, well, let's put 28 years of age, probably has no memory whatsoever of the events of 9/11. It's ancient history.
Yeah.
So this is the same difference in time, almost exactly from December 7th, 1941 to, say, September, October of 1963. That's 22 years.
Yeah.
And that was I was born in 55, and for me that was a lifetime. And so yeah, I can understand why it becomes less and less relevant, because people are older and they start dying out or they forget. And it's unfortunate. If you look at what happens in Russia, they still get tremendous turnouts for their what they call the March of the Immortals, and that's to commemorate those who died in World War II. Well, that's because 27 million Russians died. That means almost every family in Russia had one or more relatives die. Just the other day, Vladimir Putin was speaking to a group of school kids on sort of the opening day of school. And he recounted to them a letter he received from his grandfather. And his grandfather described holding his wife in his arms because she had been shot during the early days of the war as she died. So, there he was recounting something again, personal to his family. So it's one of those things that, candidly, it was, it had a greater impact on us than Pearl Harbor because it was so visual. So many people saw it. It was on the news. The media shut down for basically 2 weeks. And it was, we've never seen anything like it. I mean, I was on that day, I was asked to go into the Jim Lehrer NewsHour to talk about the attack. And to get to Jim Lehrer NewsHour, they're about 2 miles south of the Pentagon. And you get off of the major highway, it's called I-395. And I remember I was driving, it was about 5:30 in the afternoon. I was the only car on the road. They were still trying to put the fire out at the Pentagon.
Wow.
But I've never seen Washington, D.C. on a business. This was a Tuesday with only one car, me, on the road. It was unbelievable.
Wow. Yeah. I was in an abandoned zoo in the Dominican Republic, and I came back to where I was living, and the TV was on, and this building was smoking. I was asking what's going on, and right then the second plane hit.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, this
Yeah.
is insane. So I have to imagine there's at least 100 million Americans still alive that remember that day. Like my mother says, the assassination of JFK still burns in her memory.
Mm-hmm.
And she's in her 70s now. Yeah, that's a day. And so then to not show up, become the first president to not show up, I thought, phew, this guy's got some courage not showing up. I would imagine that's going to be brought up as we enter the election cycles again. So
yeah, I think their calculation was they could get away with it without it causing much harm. But I think it just, again, reinforces the image of him as a president completely detached from reality. That's the problem.
Two vacations before going to Hawaii. Never went to the train explosion, Hawaii. Never went to the train explosion in Ohio, and
Right.
then becomes the first president to skip out on the 9/11. So, well, we covered a lot of stories, about 13 really big international stories. I wanted to get your insight on that, especially on the Russia-Ukraine war, since I know that you follow that so much. Larry, I want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing your insight with our viewers today.
Thank you for having me, Stephen. Always a pleasure, man.